Hey, this is Vu, and today I'm going to be talking about the best possible maps to solo carry your team in matchmaking. Now, everybody has their own favorite map, and you might be more comfortable on other maps rather than the ones I'm mentioning here. However, I find that in general, the best possible way to carry your team is to try and stick to maps that have a very defined middle. And those maps are going to be Dust 2, Mirage, and Cache. Now, you can say Inferno as well, as there is a mid there. However, the mid isn't quite the same as the mid on the rest of these maps, where there's a middle with a bomb site on either side. And the reason that this middle idea works so well, and the reason I'm mentioning it specifically, is because having a middle typically isolates a lot of counter-terrorists when you're on the T side. That means when they have a middle, usually there's a bomb site with only one player at it, or middle has only one player at it. Now, if you're thinking about Cache here, you're usually going to find teams playing some sort of 2-2-1 or potentially a 1-3-1 setup. So if they're playing a 1-3-1, you can very easily just go for a B pick here. You can isolate the counter terrorists that you're fighting against, so you're not fighting against multiple opponents. You're very unlikely to be rotated on too quickly. You can usually try and isolate fairly well. And if you get the kill at a bomb site like this, that means that you're probably going to be able to take the bomb site and pretty much win your team the round just by getting one single kill. So you can have a lot of effect when you're on the terrorist side being able to do this, and it really opens up a lot of lanes, a lot of areas that you can go and feel somewhat safe and comfortable without relying on your teammates in any way. And that's kind of what I'm pointing at here. The reason I'm saying solo carrying is because you want to basically say, I don't want to rely on my teammates at all, and I want to solo carry them. Now, of course, this isn't true for everybody. You might have a more passive playstyle, you might be a supportive player, but those typically aren't the playstyles that you want if you want to hard carry your team and win as many games as possible in as short a time as possible. And that's what I'm really talking about here. If you have a different playstyle, that's perfectly fine. You might find other maps are a little bit more comfortable, but like I said, that's not optimal for carrying your team in matchmaking when you want to win every game you play in. Now, the reason I like these maps also extends to the CT side, because when you have a map with a defined middle, you can play typically a rotator position. So if you're thinking Mirage, you can play Cat or you can play Connector. On Dust 2, you can play middle or you can play the CT rotator if your setup allows for it. And on Cache here, you can play either A rotator at Speedway or you can play Vents rotator to B. And by doing that, you're having effect on either bomb site and middle. So you're having an effect on multiple areas that the opponents are very likely to be hitting on any given round, and so you can have as many rounds as possible where you're not being completely avoided and the enemy's not just going all the way around you. And if they do try and avoid you, like you're having an amazing game or something, you basically force them to only be able to hit one area specifically. So if you think about a map like Overpass, on Overpass here, you're going to find that even if you're very confident in a certain area, for example, I'm very confident here in bathrooms, especially with an op. If a terrorist team comes to this direction, I can usually get a pick or two and hold the bomb site. You're going to have a very hard time actually stopping your opponents from basically just going to the other side of the map. It's very easy for opponents to get control of Connector, especially if you're a B player. You can't really support your player in Connector at all, and Connector is really not a very good spot to hold in general in solo queue. You typically need some pretty decent support to be able to prevent yourself from getting shot in the back, and of course I'm talking about solo queue carrying here, where you can't really rely on your teammates, so sitting kind of isolated in Connector is not something very many people are going to be confident with. However, if you are confident with it, there's nothing stopping you from doing that, and that can be a very powerful situation to put yourself in, and that can kind of rectify the situation on CT side at least a little bit, because you can support both bomb sites. However, that's not what most people can do. Usually you're either playing B site anchor or you're playing completely dedicated to A here towards bathrooms. Even if you get very aggressive, for example, I like to do a party peek here with the op and find nobody's there, the best you can do is fast rotate, and typically this is not a good map to retake on. If the terrorists manage to split through Connector, or even without Connector, if they manage to split B and get into B, it's very hard to retake, and if they manage to split A, bathrooms is almost impossible to draw out unless your opponents play very poorly. So it's just not a very good map if your opponent's trying to avoid you even a little bit. Now, as for the rest of the maps, Dust 2 is a map that I think a lot of people might not like to play, even though it does have these advantages, and I'll try and explain that a little bit. So a couple of the reasons there might be question marks about Dust 2, and some of the reasons I don't play it personally when I'm looking to carry heavily and I'm trying to rank up, is because there are a lot of Dust 2 specialists. That's one problem. A lot of people only play Dust 2, or they're specifically very good at Dust 2 for one reason or another, especially on the terrorist side, and it can really kind of screw you up and find that you're playing against lower ranked players than you that are just doing amazingly, and they only do that well on Dust 2. Now, the other problem with Dust 2, and one of the biggest problems I have with playing Dust 2, is this middle area. So I talked about how a defined middle really does help you when you're looking at a map a lot of the time. It isolates players. But the problem with Dust 2's middle is if you're ever trying to rotate and you're playing against a team that's just dominating your team, there is a decent chance that your other team, the enemies, have some ridiculous asshole opper that sits in T-spawn all round with an op, and it would never be viable except your team is terrible and they're just demolishing them at any bomb site they go. And it doesn't matter if you play A, because you're going to have to rotate to B, and it doesn't matter if you play B or mid, because you're going to have to rotate to A. So you can imagine that an opper posted up in middle, if your opponents are just demolishing the rest of your team, which you can say might definitely happen a decent portion of the time, they might just run over whoever's defending either long or B, because those players are often isolated, because they're not very easy to hold, because the terrorists can go 4 or 5 players towards that area. You can get stuck with the situation where you have an opera sitting T-spawn all around all game and just get absolutely demolished, which has happened to me tons of times in the past. That's why I'm bringing it up. So anyways, thanks for watching, and I hope this helped. Hey Valve, I'm thinking maybe we could increase the standing accuracy of the AK and maybe the M4s as well to make them a little bit more of a laser beam on their first bullet, especially at long range, because people are noticing a little bit of randomness there. Oh, you think guns should have a maximum range that you use that so people have incentive to buy things like the Scout and the Op. All right, that makes sense. How about the running accuracy of the Tech 9? Why don't we just buff that? How about we make that better than the AK's standing accuracy? Does that sound good? Yeah? Great.